They said I was losing my mind, that I needed help, that it was best for everyone if I stayed in a place where someone could watch me. But no one watched me when I packed their lunches, paid off their debts, or held their children in the middle of the night. I was a mother, a wife, a builder of a home they now called theirs. And then one day I was gone, dropped at a nursing home like I was too much to carry. But the truth they didn't know was this: I still owned the house they lived in. I still held the company they ran. And I had no intention of staying forgotten. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. Right now, I'm sitting by a small window in a room that smells like bleach and quiet sadness. The nurses here are kind, but they call me Mom too often, like they're afraid to use my name. I wasn't always here. I used to live in a house I helped build, one filled with laughter, family dinners, and dreams that stretched across decades. Now I wake up to the sound of medication carts and whispered conversations outside my door. They told me this would be better for me, that I needed care, that I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. But I remember everything. I remember the look on my son's face when he said I'd be safer here. I remember how my daughter-in-law stood behind him, silent, arms folded, already turning away. I don't think they hated me. I think they just got tired of me. One day, I was the woman who helped pay for their wedding, who babysat when they needed a break, who stayed up baking when they said they missed home. The next day, I was someone they spoke to with careful voices and tired eyes. There was no fight, no screaming or slamming doors. Just a slow, polite erasure, a moving of my things into boxes, a signature on a form I wasn't told to read, a goodbye that never sounded like one. Now I sit with folded sweaters and old photos tucked in drawers, trying not to count the days since someone last visited. I used to run a household. I used to matter. And now I feel like a ghost that forgot to leave. But I'm still here. And this story isn't over. You might think I was thrown away. Maybe I was. But even the things we throw out can carry value. Sometimes what we toss away still holds the power to change everything. Daniel was always a dreamer. From the time he was 10, he'd talk about running his own business, building something from the ground up. When he came to us at 29 saying he had a plan, but no money, I didn't hesitate. We mortgaged our house, the one my husband and I spent our whole lives paying off. It scared me, but I told myself that's what parents do. You sacrifice so your children can rise. And watching Daniel open the doors to his first workshop, his hands shaking, but eyes full of hope, made it feel worth it. My husband Charles poured every hour of retirement into helping him. He fixed tools, managed inventory, even cleaned the bathrooms when no one else would. I brought lunches, filed papers, made coffee for clients. It wasn't glamorous, but we were together, and it felt like we were part of something important. When the company grew, Daniel and Melissa asked us to move in with them. They said it was time to take care of us for a change. They built an addition to the house, picked out colors for our bedroom, made it sound like a reward for everything we had done. Charles was thrilled. He said it was like closing the circle. For a while, it really did feel like family. Dinners together, laughter over the smallest things, helping raise their first child while they worked late. Melissa even hugged me once in the kitchen and said she didn't know how she would have gotten through new motherhood without me. That moment still sits in my chest like something holy. Then Charles got sick. It wasn't sudden, but it was fast. Cancer doesn't ask if you're ready. Daniel was quiet during those months, distracted, always on the phone. Melissa stopped talking about needing my help and started talking about needing space. After the funeral, no one said it out loud, but everything changed. I started feeling like a guest in a home I helped build. The invitations to dinner became fewer. Conversations turned into small talk. Melissa stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Margaret. I brushed it off, told myself grief does strange things to people. But deep down, I knew. The warmth was leaving. The thank yous had dried up. The people I once held in my arms now barely looked me in the eye. I told myself it was a phase, that maybe once the business settled or the baby slept through the night, they'd come back to me. But they didn't. The distance only grew quiet and slow, like a fog rolling in. Sometimes I'd sit in the corner of the living room while they laughed in the kitchen and wonder when I'd become invisible. It's strange how quickly love can fade when it's no longer convenient. I gave them everything: my money, my time, my home. And in return, I was slowly erased. Not with cruelty, but with silence. And somehow, that hurt more. It started with a conversation about space. Melissa said the baby needed a quiet room to nap during the day, and my room was closest to the nursery. She smiled when she suggested the basement, said it would be temporary just while they rearranged a few things. The basement smelled like dust and old carpet glue. There were no windows. They set up a small twin bed and moved my things down while I was out getting groceries. When I came home, my clothes were already folded in bins, and the crib was being wheeled into my old room. At first, I didn't complain. I told myself it was for the baby. I told myself I didn't need sunlight to sleep. But each night, as I lay on that stiff mattress, listening to the floor creak above me, I felt a little less human. My chair in the living room slowly disappeared. They moved it into storage to make space for a new bookshelf. My photos came down from the hallway. A new family portrait hung in their place, and I wasn't in it. I stopped being asked if I was hungry. They would eat dinner before I even came upstairs. When I asked if we could go back to eating together, Melissa said their evenings were too unpredictable now, and it was easier this way. She said it kindly, but without looking up from her phone. Daniel said I was being sensitive, that I was overthinking things. But I remembered when I used to be the first person he called about anything, and now he barely said goodnight. I began walking slower around the house just to hear my footsteps. I needed proof I was still there. I'd hear laughter from the kitchen and stay quiet on the stairs waiting for someone to notice I was missing. No one did. The worst part wasn't the basement. It wasn't the dust or the cold or the dim light from the single bulb. It was the feeling that I had become extra. Like a piece of furniture they didn't want to throw away, but also didn't want to see. I used to feel love in this house. Now I felt tolerated. And even that was starting to slip away. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just folded the laundry and was bringing a stack of towels upstairs when Daniel asked if we could talk. His voice was calm, too calm, like he had practiced this moment in his head. Melissa sat on the couch, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. Daniel said they had made a decision. He said they were worried about my memory, about my safety. He said I had left the stove on twice and forgotten to lock the front door. I told him those were accidents, that everyone forgets things sometimes. He said they had already made arrangements. A place called Willow Creek. He said it was a good place, that I'd be looked after, have my own room meals cooked for me. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat went dry. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I kept thinking this wasn't real, that I must have misunderstood something. But when Melissa handed me a packed bag neatly zipped, I knew they had planned this for days. They said it was just a trial, that I could come back if it didn't work out. But the way they avoided my eyes told me otherwise. Daniel hugged me at the door. Melissa didn't. The drive there was quiet. No music. No small talk. Just the sound of the car humming and my own thoughts screaming. I stared out the window, trying to memorize the trees, the road, the sky, anything that made me feel like I still existed. When we arrived, the nurse smiled and called me by name. She said she'd been expecting me. Daniel handed her some papers and left before I had time to ask him when he'd visit. That first night, I sat on the bed and looked around the room. It was clean, small, impersonal, like a waiting room that forgot where to send you next. I kept thinking someone would call, that maybe this was all a mistake, but no one did. I used to be the center of their world. I held their babies, their secrets, their messes, and now I was someone else's responsibility, passed off like a task they no longer had time for. I didn't know what hurt more. The fact that they thought I was losing my mind, or the fact that they didn't care enough to ask what was really going on inside it. The days at Willow Creek passed slowly. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I stopped hoping to hear Daniel's voice or see Melissa walk through the door with forced kindness. Instead, I turned inward. I began to think. I thought about the house, about the papers I signed, about how Daniel never asked me to transfer the title. I remembered how Charles always insisted everything stay in our names until we were gone. I wondered if that was still true. One evening, I asked the front desk if I could borrow a laptop. They set me up in the corner of the common room with an old one, the kind with keys that stick. I logged into my email, searched through old files, scrolled through cloud drives I had nearly forgotten existed. Piece by piece, I began pulling things together. I found the deed. The house was still under my name. I double-checked with the county registry, heart racing. The confirmation hit me like a jolt. I wasn't just a forgotten old woman in a nursing home. I was still the legal owner of the house they had pushed me out of. That night, I barely slept. Not from anger, from clarity. For the first time in months, I felt something solid under my feet. The next morning, I emailed Helen, an old friend of Charles who had practiced law for over 30 years. She called me back within the hour. I told her everything. She didn't gasp or interrupt, just listened. Then she said 6 words that cracked something open inside me. You still have more power than they think. We started with the business. I found the original documents from when we helped Daniel start it. Helen helped me request updated filings. Turns out, I still held controlling interest. Charles and I had never formally signed anything over. Daniel must have assumed he had it all. I printed everything out. I made a binder, labeled it in bold black ink, sat with it in my lap like armor. I wasn't sure what I'd do yet, but I knew I wouldn't be quiet anymore. The staff noticed the shift in me. I wasn't dragging my feet or staring blankly at the wall. I was awake, alert, moving with a purpose. I stopped asking when my family would visit. I stopped letting grief define my days. They thought they had put me away, that I would fade quietly and completely. But I hadn't disappeared. I was still here. And now I had something they never expected. A second wind. A plan. A way to take back everything they tried to erase. The car ride back to the house was quiet. Not the kind filled with sadness, but the kind that comes with calm certainty. I sat beside Helen, the binder on my lap, the papers signed, the decisions made. We pulled into the driveway of the house they thought they had taken from me. Daniel opened the door with confusion on his face. He didn't expect to see me. He definitely didn't expect to see a lawyer. Melissa stood behind him, holding their toddler, her smile slipping the moment she recognized Helen's face. I asked if we could speak in the living room. I didn't sit down. I opened the binder and laid the documents on the coffee table. The deed to the house. The ownership filings for the business. The freeze order on the company's bank account. The legal removal of Daniel from his executive position. I let the silence sit for a few seconds, just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. Daniel stammered something about misunderstanding. He said they thought everything had already been transferred. I didn't answer. Melissa said it must be some mistake. She asked what I wanted. I looked at her and told her I didn't want anything. Not anymore. I had already filed to sell the house. The new owners were moving in 2 weeks. I gave them time to pack nothing more. I had the locks changed that evening. The company would be evaluated, restructured, and part of it sold off. I no longer needed their permission to make decisions. Daniel asked how I could do this. He looked wounded, like I was betraying him. I almost laughed. But instead, I told him something I had rehearsed in my head 100 times. When someone hands you over to strangers and calls it care, they give up the right to call it family. Melissa didn't say another word. She just picked up the baby and walked out of the room. Daniel stayed there, shoulders sinking, staring at the papers like they might disappear if he blinked long enough. But they didn't. None of this was a threat. It was already done. I walked through that house one last time, touched the doorway where Charles used to stand every morning, paused by the kitchen where I once rocked my grandchild to sleep. Then I walked out without looking back. The next day, I moved into a small cabin by the lake. Not fancy, but mine. Quiet. Honest. The kind of place where I didn't have to earn a room or explain why I belonged. I made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the water ripple like it had all the time in the world. They never saw it coming. They thought I would stay silent, broken, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. But I remembered who I was. I remembered what I built. And I remembered that even love, when turned cruel, cannot demand loyalty. This was never about revenge. It was about recognition, about reminding them and myself that I was never disposable. I was never powerless. I just needed time to remember it. And once I did, I didn't ask for justice. I took it. The lake is quiet in the mornings. I sit on the porch with a warm cup of tea and watch the mist float low over the water like it's hiding secrets. There's no sound except for bird song and the soft creak of the rocking chair beneath me. I never imagined I'd live alone at this age, and I never imagined I'd feel this free. The cottage is small, but it fits me perfectly. Everything here is mine, not because someone gave it to me, but because I chose it. I planted flowers along the fence. They're not growing straight yet, but I don't mind. Every day, I check on them like old friends, watching them reach for the sun 1 stubborn inch at a time. It reminds me that growth doesn't always look pretty at first. I donated 30% of the company shares to a women's shelter that helps mothers restart their lives. The rest I placed in a trust far away from Daniel's reach. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it to finally put something good in the hands of those who would use it with care. Daniel has tried to call. I don't answer. Melissa sent a letter once, short and cold. I read it, then fed it to the fire. I'm not angry. I just know that some doors once shut are better left closed. I joined a painting class at the community center down the road. Most of us are older women and none of us know what we're doing. We laugh a lot. We spill paint. We talk about books and grandkids and how the world used to move slower. There's a dog that visits me from next door. His name is Buddy. He doesn't belong to me, but he acts like he does. Sometimes I think he senses that this house needed a heartbeat louder than my own. I sleep through the night now. No creaking floors above me. No hushed voices through walls. Just the breeze, the occasional owl, and the deep stillness that comes when you stop waiting for someone to come back. I don't need revenge to feel whole. I don't need anyone to apologize. My peace came the moment I chose to stop proving I deserved love. I know who I am. I know what I gave. And I know now that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Every time the lake ripples, I see a woman who thought her story was over. But here I am, still writing it, still breathing, still free. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt forgotten, I want you to know something. You are not alone. I know how heavy it feels to give your heart to people who don't protect it. It hurts in places no one can see. And it doesn't matter how strong you are, it still cracks something deep inside when the ones you loved most act like you don't matter anymore. But I promise there's life after that kind of pain. There's a version of you on the other side of this. One that doesn't wait for someone else's approval to breathe. One that can sit in silence and still feel full. It won't happen all at once, and it won't be easy, but it's possible. Letting go isn't weakness. It's a decision. A quiet, steady choice to stop carrying what was never yours to fix. You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who only see your value when it's useful to them. I spent too long thinking that love meant staying even when it hurt. That if I gave, more forgave, more stayed small enough, quiet enough, things would get better. But they didn't. And when I finally stopped trying, that's when healing found me. You deserve peace, not just survival. You deserve laughter that isn't forced rest, that isn't guilty, and love that doesn't make you question your place in the room. You don't have to earn those things. They're yours because you're human, because you've lived, because you're still here. Don't let the people who hurt you define your worth. Don't let their silence shape your story. Your strength isn't in what you endured. It's in what you did with the pieces afterward. So if today you feel small, if you feel invisible, I hope you remember me. A woman who was told her time was over, who was pushed aside like she didn't matter, who found a way back to herself anyway. Your story is not over, not even close. And you are not too late, too much, or too broken. You are becoming. And that's something no one can take from you.